Perfect. You know, I'm getting better at this. When I click go, I have to wait like a minute. And so I really hope I didn't look silly while I was waiting. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to Time Out Sewing with Becky. I'm Becky Goldsmith. And I've got another of the quilts from the hit parade from my closet hanging behind me. That is Stars in the Garden, which is, it started out as a book that Linda and I did in the late 90s. It's a downloadable pattern now, and you can find it at pieceofcake.com. That's what's there, because some of you are sure to ask. All right, so this week I am talking about thread, and I was mostly going to talk about how to match your thread for hand applique. And that's a pretty short subject, but I'll definitely walk you through that. More importantly, it's how do you choose the right thread for invisible hand applique? Now, I actually wrote a book. The Ultimate Thread Guide. And when I wrote this, I really thought I knew everything there was to know about thread. Swear to you I did. Because I've been quilting for so long and sewing garments before that. I so did not know everything about thread. There's a lot to know. Now, specifically for this, the thread choices for invisible hand applique that most people lean on are cotton, poly, or silk, or a combination of cotton, poly together. So rather than hold up little spools so you could see them here, I made a video. I've made several videos, and they're little short ones in between me talking to you. The first part is about fiber content. As you will see, there's actually more to think about than you think there is. There is a whole lot of information in this book, and one part of it is fibers. The fibers thread is made from. I tend to stick with cotton thread in my hand applique because I mostly sew cotton fabric. One of the main reasons I like cotton thread is because as the cotton fabric gets wet, gets laundered, gets used, the thread, because it's the same fiber, tends to react in a similar fashion. Cotton is readily available in a wide variety of weights and colors. It isn't particularly expensive. It stays on the needle. Really, there's nothing I don't like about cotton thread, so this is what I use. Some people really like polyester thread for their hand applique because it is a very strong thread and it's fine. And I would not say anything negative about polyester as a fiber. It has plenty of excellent uses. For me, for hand applique, it is not my first choice for a variety of reasons. One is that polyester, by its very nature, likes to stay straight. It doesn't like to crease and stay put, which means it can slide around in the eye of the needle. It's hard to keep in place. The other thing is that in a lot of places, like if you're machine sewing with polyester, you might notice that the threads as the top and bobbin thread knit together, let's say you sew to the end of a seam and you clip those threads, because polyester likes to be straight, those can kind of let loose. Polyester's a little slick. That is not one of the attributes I'm looking for in my hand applique thread. The other thing is that polyester is a petroleum product, and that is an easy thing to overlook. But let's do this. Woo! Now, it burned, but more importantly, it burned and it's all stuck together there. That part's not so terrible. It just shows you that it really is made of something different. If you do the same thing with cotton, it's going to burn too. Here we go. But it's just ash. It just goes away because it's cotton, right? Petroleum products are not by their nature horrible. I use petroleum products all the time. If I was sewing garments, I would use a polyester or polycotton. If I was doing heavy-duty projects and purses, and there's just all kinds of places where polyester thread is an excellent choice. I can tell you, because I looked long and hard, that there is not any data on the longevity of polyester thread. There's just not any. It hasn't been around long enough. The only data that I could find is more from the art world, where art and artifacts made from plastics and polymers, dating back from the beginning of plastics and polymers, which would be, what, the 40s, the 50s, and forward, they're not all holding up so well. And I think you all, if you think about it, are very much aware of the fact that if you've got old plastics, even old silicone, it kind of breaks down, it gets gummy, it's not the same as it was when you bought it. I have no idea if polyester thread will do anything like that with time. But speaking for myself, if I am making a hand applique quilt that I hope is going to be here for a very long time, I will choose cotton because it has more of a track record. I trust it a little more. And like I said, there's lots of cotton thread on the market, works really well. That's what I would choose. Wait, what happened? It went away. It came back. You know what happened? I'm here. I clicked on a different thing on my computer, and surely I'm here. Yes, I'm still here. Jeff, my youngest son, texted me to say he just got his vaccine, and I had to click on it. That just threw me completely. Okay, but I'm back. All right. So the next question is, what about silk? No, I don't want to go there quite yet. I want to talk about cotton and polyester before we get into silk. So one of the wonderful things about polyester as a fiber that thread companies love and that machine companies love is that polyester is malleable. You can make really fine threads. You can make really thick threads. You can make it be really shiny. You can make it long staple or short label. You can do all kinds of things with polyester, which is why there is so much polyester thread on the market. And for example, in your machine quilting, if you want a really shiny thread, well, you're going to probably need polyester because that's where you get it. Cotton is not that shiny. Cotton is a short staple fiber, and there are really nice cottons, and there's maybe some not so great cottons. The thread we would be buying is all made, by and large, with really excellent cotton, so you don't have to worry about that. But cotton is cotton is cotton. You can't make it be what it isn't. So, like I said, it's not that I have a dislike for polyester. I just want to pick and choose where I want to use it. Okay, so what about silk? Let me play the video and then I can add to it after. Silk is an excellent, beautiful fiber that has been in use for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So I don't have anything bad to say about silk. What I do want to say is that silk has properties just like any other fiber. One of the things I learned early on about silk, and I knew this before I was a quilter, is that the way silk feels when it's dry is different from the way it can feel when it's wet. And if you've ever hand washed a piece of silk or held silk that is wet, you know that that's true. It's just not as supple when it's wet as it is when it's dry. It gets a little more rigid. And I had an opportunity to visit with a quilt conservator down in Georgetown, Texas, some years back. And what she told me was that a lot of her work came in repairing quilts that had been sewn with silk, where the silk threads broke when they were wet. It makes sense. Silk is a little more rigid when wet than cotton is. So if you're washing a quilt, it's 2 layers of cotton plus the batting plus the weight of the water. Cotton thread would behave the way the fabric does, while the silk thread may not. I borrowed this silk fabric from a friend because I don't actually sew with silk very much. If I did, I might have some silk thread around, but I don't because I don't hand applique with silk thread. What I wanted to do was a science experiment for you. I wanted to take some silk thread and demonstrate how it might behave when it's wet as opposed to when it's dry. So what I did was pull threads off of the fabric. I pulled several threads out. And these are thicker threads than you would find off of a spool of silk thread that you would be using for hand applique. And I had to really pull to break that. Let me move this away so that you can maybe see that better. Here's another similar one. You know, I'm giving that a really good pull. Now what if I get the center of that wet? It breaks a little easier. So my thought is that silk is not bad. It has plenty of uses. If you like to sew with it, feel free. Just be aware that you might, on quilts that are sewn with silk threads, you might want to be very careful how you launder them. If you are going to get them wet, you might do the thing where you line a bathtub with a sheet and soak the quilt really well and then let it drain and pick the quilt up by the sheet so that you're not putting a lot of stress on those threads. So there's that. The other thing about silk thread, the reason why appliqueurs really like it is because it is so strong and so fine. It's almost so fine that it's hard to thread it on the needle, and it definitely slides around in the eye. So if you sew with silk, you probably need to, once you get it on your needle, knot it at the end so that it doesn't fall off the needle. But I don't sew with silk that much, and there you go. So I'm sure there's other tips to sew with it, but that's a big one. Now, the main question, the one I was starting the whole day with that I got sidetracked by thread fibers, is choosing thread to match your applique fabric. And actually, that whole topic is what sidetracked me before you even saw me today onto the fiber thing, because people who sew with silk thread will sometimes use just a few shades of thread because the thread is so fine and it hides so well. They don't have a lot of colors. I would still, if it was me and I had silk thread, I would match the color to the fabric in the way that I'm about to show you now. These are some fabrics that I've been working with lately, and they are excellent examples of the kind of fabrics you'll run into when you are doing your applique and trying to match your thread to your applique. So I'm going to start with the green. It's the easiest. I'm reaching into this box. This is my bright thread. And if I was just guessing, I would try that thread first. And it's not horrible, but it's not great, even to my naked eye. This color is better. It's a brighter green, and even to my naked eye, it disappears better into the thread. And this right here, this is what I do when I'm trying to pick my thread colors. I pull out the likely prospects and spread the thread out over the face of the fabric. And sometimes I'll try like a random color to see, like this is a gray-green, to see if it works. Nope, that brighter green still disappears the most. This thread is darker, and it matches that darker motif in the fabric. But I would never in a million years applique this fabric with this thread because there is so much more of the light background. When you cut your applique piece out of this, the edges of it are way more likely to be that light color than they are to be that dark color. What about this fabric, this pink and green? If you look at the print, the pink is the foreground and the green is the background, right? Because that pink jumps forward, the green pushes back. And you might think that, well, okay, maybe the green would be a good choice. And that green is not terrible. But I think the pink is going to be a better choice. It disappears more. So for this fabric, I would choose this pink. What about this fabric? There is so much going on here. There isn't one common color. I might try that green. In person, that's not a good choice. That's not bad. It's a little on the darker side. Oh, what about this from my soft box? A lot might depend on where your applique piece was cut from. When I have a choice between two that are good choices and one runs light and one runs dark, I almost always choose the lighter rather than darker. That is not bad, and that is a teal blue. So when you compare the choices that you have, you look at them and pick the ones that disappear the most. And I think that blue disappears better than any of the rest. And if I was appliquing this, that's the thread I would go with. What about this one? It's got a lot of pink in it, but I don't think pink is going to be the best color. It wouldn't be a horrible color, but it's not a great color. That blue, that kind of medium gray blue, that's the color that would work best on this. So in a nutshell, that is how I find the thread that I'm going to use on any given applique piece. And that's why it's handy to have a collection of threads to choose from in a variety of colors and values. So there you go. That's my box. And interestingly enough, that box of 50, I almost never have to find a thread outside of those colors. I do have other threads, but I use them so rarely that I hardly ever use anything else. Okay, but then there are prints that have high contrast inside the print, like black and whites. And so I wanted to show you this as well. High contrast prints present a whole other problem, and I run into that more often with black and white because I use black and white prints as stems pretty often. You got black and you got white. You might also sometimes find that instead of white, your background is more of an ecru. So for instance, that soft white is a better match than the stark white to the background, but that really shows up on the black. Even though the black shows up in the white area, it bothers me a lot less than does the white showing up on the black. If your stitches are really good, you could hide either one of these in both areas. If your stitches are close to perfect, but still you see a little thread, you just have to decide which one is going to bother you the least. And it could be that in the middle of your sewing, you realize that you chose unwisely. I would just knot my thread and knot up with the other choice and see how it works. So, there are really rare occasions where I might have a print that has a whole bunch of, say, black and a whole bunch of white. And I might use two different colors of thread, but I am basically lazy. So, I know you might not think so, but yes, I am basically lazy. And I would pick one and go with it. All right, and I wanted to show you, I've got a close-up of the block that you can't see behind me right there, and then another block, so you can kind of see what it looks like when your thread matches well. Here's a detail of the honeysuckle from near the center of the quilt, and if you look close at the inner points, you'll see a little bit of thread because that's the way I sew my points to secure the fraying fabric at the center of that inner point. But if the thread matches well enough, that is something you have to search to find. It's not just really obvious. And this would have been sewn back in the day with Mettler's 50 weight 3-ply thread, which is a thicker thread than I use now. These two blocks are a nice indication of what it looks like when your thread matches really well and when your thread matches almost really well. So my thread is a little darker here, it's a little more visible, but that orange here is a much better match. So you don't always get an exact match, but again, if your stitches are pretty good, it's good. What if your stitches are kind of bad? Well, you either accept that and embrace it and go with it, or you work a little harder to make your stitches a little better. But you know, I'm not a fan of going backwards ever. So let's say you're a beginning appliquer or even not a beginning appliquer. Let's just say whatever. Maybe you need a new glass. I need new glasses, by the way. Let's say you need new glasses or something, and your stitches just aren't perfect. You know, if the applique pieces stay fixed to the block, they are good stitches. Don't ever beat yourself up, and don't go backwards. Don't go ripping stuff out because you've got a few stitches that aren't exactly perfect. You know, embrace the joy of making the quilt. Choose the thread that matches as best you can and go with it. Now, I mentioned the Mettler 50 weight 3-ply thread, which got me on the sidetrack that we're about to go on to now, and that's thread weight. And I'm going to go over 30 minutes this time, because thread weight is such a complex and important topic. It's complicated. And you know, the book, there's pages in here about thread weight that explain it. I'm going to try and give it to you some here. And just because I've told you some of the stuff that's in there, can I just explain? There's a whole lot more in here, but thread weight it's important. So thread, let's say most of us buy 50 weight thread, and you probably know that there's 2-ply and 3-ply. You may not be as aware that the companies, they tinker with their formulas over time. So Mettler's 50 weight thread back in the day when I was a beginning quilter was a 3-ply quilt. I'm sorry, 3-ply thread. It isn't anymore. It's a 2-ply thread, and it's a little finer, but not a whole lot finer. If you have in your mind that 50 weight thread is all the same, let go of that. I've got to explain this. So there are 3 systems that thread companies, at least 3, there's 3 main ones that thread companies use to come up with the number that you read on the spool. 2 are fixed length. So the metric one is a fixed length. And that's sometimes when you see it on a spool, it just says the WT. That kind of indicates that it's this system. And it's measured in the number of kilometers per kilogram. So you've got 1 kilogram, that doesn't change. But let's say it takes 50 kilometers of thread to equal that 1 kilogram, regardless of anything else. Doesn't matter what ply it is, that's a 50 weight thread. Then there's the number English or count ply. But can I just say, if you see 50/2 or 50/3, it doesn't always probably mean that this is the system, but it might. Okay, so this one is the pound, 1 pound, that's a fixed number. It's how many hanks of thread go into that 1 pound. And if I remember correctly, a hank is 840 yards, I think. It's in the book. So it's 50 hanks equals 1 pound. That's a 50 weight thread. And then there's one other system, and this one is a fixed length as opposed to weight. And this is the Tex system. So 1,000 meters, that never changes, equals how many grams? So if you've got 1,000 meters of whatever thread it is, and it equals 50 grams, that's a 50 weight thread. Oh, Siri's talking to me. So if you just stop and think about that for a minute, that tells you that all the spools that might be numbered 50 weight, none of the, and this is just a small portion, none of the companies got there in the same way. So the thickness of the thread, the amount that the thread is twisted, that weight number doesn't tell you any of it. What you have to, and not even the strength of the thread, doesn't cover that either. So what you have to do is look at those 50 weight threads and compare it with other threads that you might look at and think you also like for hand applique, and decide what works for you. Now, I'd like to tell you, I will tell you because it makes me happy to say, the thread companies that sell to quilters and crafters, I have yet to find one that makes crummy thread. And I looked at a lot of thread. They make really good thread, and they are all very particular about the threads they carry. And they are not all the same. They just aren't. All you have to do is start comparing different companies' spools of threads, and you will notice right out of the gate, they are really different. So, let me switch this. So, you really, I think it's important to evaluate threads with an open mind. Case in point, I sew with the bobbins. I still, after looking at all that thread, I still like Superior's Masterpiece off the bobbin, as much for the convenience as for the thread. Superior's Masterpiece is a 50 weight 2-ply thread here. It is a 50 weight 3-ply thread here. This is thicker. It's got more plies. It's still a 50 weight. That part I don't understand at all. I don't know. Don't know why it's still a 50 weight. Not my job to figure that one out. But I still use this by and large all the time. I haven't found a good reason to change. That said, Aurifil came out with, it's been a year or two now, maybe more, an 80 weight cotton thread that is very, very nice. It is fine like silk, but it's not silk. So it has the attributes that I look for in a cotton thread. It's easy to handle. It stays on the needle, behaves like cotton. I like it a lot. It's thinner. This is an 80 weight thread. It is a finer thread than the 50 weight thread. It is strong. It's pretty strong. Let's see here. Like, let me hold it up where you can see. If I put it, I have to hold it in front of my hair so you can kind of see. It'll break, but I have to give it a good yank, but it's finer. So I use this, the 80 weight thread, for the times I am hand appliquing a batik, because batiks are so tightly woven that a thicker thread wants to kind of sit up on the weave. This is really nice for batiks. I use it with Liberty of London cotton lawn. It's a great thread for that. I might use it for all the rest of my applique, but I'm going to go back to the part that I'm kind of lazy. You probably should use a shorter length of thread if you're using this, because as there's wear and tear on the thread as you pull it through, it wears out a little quicker just because of the abuse of sewing with it. And I don't like to stop and rethread my needle very often. So I stick with the thicker thread most of the time. But for those of you who really like the fineness of silk or poly or a cotton poly blend, for those of you who like that, if you are interested in looking at a cotton thread, but you want to try something fine, you might invest in a spool or two of Aurifil's 80 weight just for grins, just to see if you like it. If it was me, I would not buy a ginormous number of spools before you sew with it, because it is not inexpensive. But there again, it's not super expensive either. It's thread. It's not going to be that expensive. But you do want to find out you like it before you buy it. Okay, so evaluate with an open mind. I think that's it. All right, how long did I go? Well, I'm only 3.5 minutes overboard. Let's see. I'm looking at the comments. Hello, everybody who's watching. Thank you for being here on New Year's Eve. Is that where we are? I think that's where we are. We are nearly to the end of 2020. Amazing, right? Who thought that would happen? Here we go. If any of you have suggestions for future timeouts, I am happy to listen to your suggestions, because that's where all these topics are coming from. If you don't send me suggestions, I'm going to have to, melt my brain and come up with some on my own. So do please send me suggestions. And I think I won't take up any more of your day. I thank you so much for joining me. This really is fun. It's kind of a kick. Who knew, right? I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 2:00, that's Central Time. And until then, may you have many happy stitches.